Greetings. My name is David Pluviose, and welcome to In the Margins. Today, I am so pleased to have as our guest Julian Thompson, Senior Director for Strategy Development at the UNCF Institute for Capacity Building, and Dr. Darryl Ann Lai Fang, who is Assistant Vice President for Transformation Support at UNCF. Thank you both so very much for joining us here at In the Margins. I'd like to get started. The work of the Institute for Capacity Building, of course, as many of our readers and listeners know, has for many years boosted HBCUs as they've gone through so many challenges. But Julian, for those who are unfamiliar with the Institute's work, I was wondering if you give us an overview of what the Institute does and perhaps your role and Darryl Ann's role in it as well, please. Thank you so much.
Sure, happy to, David. And once again, thank you so much for the invitation to join you in conversation today. We are celebrating here in 2026 the 20th anniversary of UNCF's Institute for Capacity Building, which has us just tremendously excited about being in a reflective space about all that ICB is and all that ICB has accomplished since our first employee, Dr. Anthony Pinkard, was brought into the organization in 2006. For those of you who are sort of familiar, those in your audience who are familiar with UNCF, you'll know that we're an 81, now almost 82-year-old organization that historically has focused on fundraising and on scholarships and programs and sort of making sure that those resources get into the hands of our institutions and the students that attend them. The Institute for Capacity Building was founded by our current president and CEO, Dr. Michael Lomax, and he oftentimes calls us the innovation arm of UNCF. We're basically waking up every day thinking about the future of HBCUs, about the systems, the policies, the approaches, the partnerships, the technologies, the communities of practice, the cultures, the ways of being that can help HBCUs get to a place where their long-term sustainability is assured. And we do that work in a couple of different ways. Dr. Lai Fang is the leader of our transformation support work. That basically is a change management shop that we have embedded here in our institute that's partnering with institutions every day, every week of the year to try to figure out what are the strategic priorities, what are the presidential considerations, what's going up, down, and sideways on campus, so that as we find opportunities or partnerships, that transformation support team is plugging them into the institution and ensuring that those programs and initiatives that can lead to transformation really are adopted with fidelity on our campuses. This is the fifth year for our annual conference, Unite. It has become the preeminent space for bringing together transformational leaders across the HBCU ecosystem. We have an executive leadership team. So that's a team that focuses on presidents and board members and all of those who are really responsible for stewarding an institution and its success. And then finally, we generate what are called catalytic opportunities. And that means whether it's in mental health or wealth building, climate or industry collaborations, what are those new frontiers that we need to make sure HBCUs have an opportunity to engage, embrace, and understand what the world of the possible is? So that in total is what we do. And we're excited after now almost 20 years to have a lot of lessons about what it means to do transformation and change work within the HBCU context.
Julian, while you were talking, I was thinking ICB should be called the answer. Now, the answer to what is dependent upon the needs of the institution, but the answer, right? And it's funny, I'm thinking that, but we're also 100% grant funded. So our answers might be real concise right now, but just thinking of us being able to support our institutions in multiple ways, to me is an amazing story of who the Institute for Capacity Building is.
Darryl Ann, I was wondering if you could talk about how the strategy for the Institute has changed over its history. It's very interesting to see what has happened with HBCUs, even recently, right? Even recently, with regards to funding availability, but perhaps still a lack of leadership stability. I was wondering if you could talk about how strategy might have changed through, from the days of the Institute's conception. I was wondering if you talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So the Institute for Capacity Building was first birthed all of the right answers. It was offering discrete technical assistance in about 6 to 7 different ways. For example, enrollment management, advancement, facilities and infrastructure. And if you listen to the experiences of our institutions today, those are the same experiences and roadblocks that our institutions are facing right now. Here's the difference, and it's because we've had a great learning. When we supported institutions in one way, if using enrollment management as an example, let's say we supported an institution in enrollment management and we successfully grew enrollment. If we did not think about facilities, if we did not think about the other stakes or spokes that would impact enrollment, admissions, then we lost students and our retention numbers fell, right? And so while we supported the institutions in discrete ways, without those wraparound services, the long-term success of the work that we did were not realized. And so in the very beginning, it was very discrete technical services, even though it was grant related. And then about maybe by 2015, 2016, we received the Career Pathways Initiative grant. At that time, it was considered the big bet for HBCUs, right? $50 million. And so in getting that big bet funding, they wanted us to focus on career services. Well, as you may know, at our institutions, career services is a very minute space for our institutions to focus on, right? So a lot of the approach was building a better career service space, adding computers, adding people, so forth and so forth. And while it would be helpful, we're always now thinking of the long-term support for our institutions. Is it going to be helpful 10 years from now? And in bringing on at that time, director of the Career Pathways Initiative, we changed that from a very focus area to a more broad approach. The three-pronged approach focused on guided pathways, curricular enhancement, and integrated co-curricular engagement. This allowed us to look at the institution holistically as opposed to in very discrete areas. And a holistic approach then forced the institutions to communicate across institution instead of operating in silos, right? Individuals had to come together to develop programming, initiatives, opportunities at the institution that would ultimately impact students' success. We always used to say, make everything easy but the learning. The learning had to be rigorous. And so that Career Pathways Initiative helped us to kind of shift our way. Now, what we are focusing on is continuing that holistic approach, but instead of what the institution cannot do, we changed our language to what can the institution do with what they have, right? So a lot of times our donors, even the institution's other partners, they talk about what the institution do not have. They don't have funding. There's a lot of transitions. And so we focus on the not have instead of focusing on, we have some excellent people in this space that we can rely on. With the money that we do have, how can we support the institutions? And so now our engagement with the institutions is not just about funding alone. It is about catalytic support for our institutions. So the three areas we are looking at is transformation, unite, professional development, and then catalytic support, looking beyond the funding. And it's so interesting, right? Before, institutions said they didn't want to work with us unless we can provide funding to work with them. Quite recently, I've had multiple institutions now reach out to us and say, can we be a partner with UNCF and the Institute for Capacity Building? Despite funding, we just want a part of your services, like what strategy development provides, which is narration and really being able to tell the story. Our executive leadership work, which is helping them work with their board governance, helping them with accreditation and their strategic plan, which is us, which is change management and project management. So they are seeing the value of our work beyond money.
I think that that's perfect. We're building a networked approach to the transformation of Black colleges and universities, understanding that no one institution is going to do by themselves what the collective can
That's right.
accomplish together. And
That's
so,
right.
figuring out that process of getting the buy-in for the networked approach has been a real journey for us.
That's
But it's
right.
led us to a place where we've got, now about 40 institutions that are committed to being a part of our transformation network.
And what's so exciting is, to Julian's point about this networked approach, one of the experiences we've had with our institutions before is the fear of sharing, whether it's sharing data, sharing knowledge, sharing ideas. Now we have built a level of trust, not only from institution to institution, but also from UNCF to our institution. So now institutions are connecting with one another rather than saying we don't want to share our ideas in case an institution steal the ideas. So the dynamics have changed so wonderfully that it has become a sought after relationship. They're looking for institutions to help them answer the questions, which, by the way, is different than shared services, right? A lot of our people kind of switched the two, shared services and networked approach. But our institutions are now learning from one another.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. And I wanted to touch on the Institute's work in particular with executive leadership and boards, because of course, great strategies, even ample funding, all these really can't work in an environment where we have seen a lot of dysfunction, when it comes to boards of trustees and executive leadership. HBCUs in particular. I think UNCF had a report just recently that talked about how turnover at HBCUs is significantly higher than turnover at higher education institutions as a whole. And I believe it's, of course, well documented, the negative effect high turnover has on institutional stability as a whole. And so I was wondering if you both could talk about that executive leadership work and the work with boards. One of the things with boards of trustees that, I often wonder, I say, is there any training that is done for boards of trustees members before they come in? They have such an outsized impact on institutions, but some of the actions and some of the dysfunction really has hurt, I think, these institutions. And so I was wondering if you could talk about that piece, this executive leadership and board piece, and how the Institute has worked to bring stability to the area, and how that area of leadership impacts the work that you all do holistically. I was wondering if you all could touch on that piece in particular.
I really appreciate the question, David, and it is a timely one given, the challenges that our HBCUs are facing, but really the challenges being faced by all of higher education. This is a challenging time to work in higher education, given the backlash against going to college that we see from different corners of society, from government systems to philanthropic spaces, giving the resource constraints that institutions are increasingly having to reconcile with. We know that those financial constraints are particularly pronounced at HBCUs because of historic underfunding and also because of the type of students that HBCUs educate. And so, for me, the first point of importance when thinking about presidential and board engagement is first just having a tremendous amount of gratitude for those who choose, in spite of all of the different challenges and dynamics in play in higher education, to step up to the plate and lead. We want to make sure that we're in a space to honor those folks, to make sure that they have the supports that they need, to be able to give them grace and know that oftentimes they're not going to get everything right, but that we want to be in a position to get them what they need to be successful. You mentioned, David, the recently released report, Stable Leadership, which was just released by our executive leadership team. And so I want to just give a shout out to Asia Johnson on our team for her tremendous work in putting together that report. And also our executive vice president for UNCF's research and member engagement team, Dr. Walter Kimbrough, who is a three-time HBCU president and just has an instinct about what this issue is about sort of presidential and board engagement in his bones. In that report, and I don't want to spoil the whole thing, so I hope your readers sort of go onto our website and take a look. But we basically issued 4 different recommendations for the field to consider and prioritize if we want to get to a space where we're really supporting HBCU leaderships in a new and dynamic way. The first is we have to improve presidential searches. We need to make sure that institutions have the opportunity to hear wide and far about the types of talent and characters that can really support their institution in getting to the next level. After those searches, we really need to make sure as a community that we're developing comprehensive and intentional onboarding, mentoring, and succession plans for our presidents. We know that some presidents will stay for a short time, some may stay longer. We need to make sure that every moment that they're on campus, that they feel supported, that there's an individual or groups that they can reach out to for support. And within the Institute for Capacity Building, we have a number of individuals that work with us as presidents and residents. So they get to be a kind of a space of support and engagement to existing presidents. So just want to highlight that those existing supports while on campus can be really critical. The other 2 recommendations that are made within the Stable Leadership Report are strengthening board governance. Board governors need to understand the importance of the presidential position and how to support presidents in their leadership effectively. And then finally, the dynamics of what it means to lead on an HBCU campus are woefully understudied. And so we need to make sure that we're advancing research that can help us unpack the question of leadership and how to maximize it on our campuses. So those are some high level things that are coming top of mind for us. I know that Darryl Ann, through your work in transformation support, you've seen the ebbs and flows of how we've talked about this issue and how our institutions have wrestled with the question of sustaining executive leadership.
Yeah, it's definitely a space of tension that we have to realize. This is the reality that some of our presidents are dealing with right now. We do offer training to our board and our presidents. It's one of the things that I have been thinking about is how do we put adaptive leadership into position in some of these spaces? Because it's not something you can process away, right? You can't check the box and say, this is done, this is done, this is done, and board governance will no longer be a problem. It takes influence, it takes persuasion. The other thing I would say, as you're well aware, a lot of our HBCUs are under a faith-based board. And so the faith-based board is coming to this seat with a different understanding, a different mentality, and a different approach. So how do we support institutions to, well, the presidents and executive leadership to speak the language that their board speaks, first of all, and then secondly, from the board perspective, having them understand the impact, long-term impact of the instability of presidency. So a lot of times the decisions are made for maybe political reasons. Some decisions may be rightful decisions, and we also have to look at the impact. So in the report, it says the average president life is 3.5 years. At HBCUs, it's 2 years, which, as you know, if you are doing change across any organization, the first year for a leader would be observation. The second year is then based on the observation, is developing your goals and objectives and what you want, what your voice will be at the organization or the institution. So if the average term for a president is 2 years, that means they did not have the time to do anything that would be impactful for the institution. And if that happens over and over and over again, the institution will be constantly and consistently falling backwards, not failing forward, right? Which is a great word, but literally falling backward. And so we have to find a way to help the board realize that in the long term, it is hurting the institutions to do that. That takes time, quite frankly. It goes back to what we said before. It takes building relationships. It takes trust. And that takes time in order for us to move the needle in some of these conversations, but we're willing to put in the time.
I was wondering if you could talk about some successes, any success stories in particular that you can point to. Darryl Ann mentioned work, in particular training with executive leadership, with boards, and talked a little earlier about the beginnings of the institute, where the institute might have gone to address one area, but of course the realization set in that, whoa, we have to look at this picture holistically for everything to work. Julian, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about perhaps some particular success stories in a place where the institute had an intervention that had a tangible effect on some of our HBCUs. I wonder if you talk a little bit about that, Julian.
When I think about an institution that really took the opportunity to partner with the Institute for Capacity Building in a way that really moved their mission, their vision, their sense of purpose forward, I think about a small school with a big heart and big purpose in Hawkins, Texas, named Jarvis Christian University. Jarvis Christian has been partnered with us in some form or fashion for much of ICB's history. And it's been a real lesson, at least for me, to understand the particular dynamics of their position, their leadership, how they want to make an impact in the world and with their students, and to figure out how we as an institute can be best supportive of that vision. I'm recalling a few years ago, our colleague Asia Johnson partnered with the institution to develop a set of board trainings and board engagements that were really helping the institution develop and refine its strategic plan. It was out of that strategic planning process that Jarvis Christian committed to calling itself a communiversity, basically a institution that was not only going to serve traditional students, but think about the impact of the institution for faculty, for staff, for family members, for alumni, for the surrounding community, and create those learning spaces that would make an impact in Hawkins and beyond. So it was really exciting to see that type of partnership on executive leadership, getting presidential, elevating presidential leadership, getting board buy-in, how that led to some really tangible results for Jarvis Christian. What we end up seeing is that as institutions work with us, as they start to build momentum and we start to understand where their priorities are, we can connect them to the right resources and supports to help them go even further. So, with Jarvis Christian as an example, they were probably the gold star participant in our coaching program. And that program was designed to engage students who had recently unenrolled at the institution to return to the institution. Doesn't surprise me to know that they were our gold star because they were thinking about community approaches to institutional goals from that strategic planning process. So the fact that their staff and faculty were so ready to welcome in former members of their community to re-enroll just makes sense. They were also a really important influencer on how we think about our digital solutions and the types of technologies that are going to work well on an HBCU campus. They were instrumental for us in building our vision around a digital future for HBCUs, and that's because they were so tuned in to thinking about their own needs and how they translated to their community. So Jarvis Christian is always the example that rings closest to me.
I was going to also highlight another institution, Voorhees University. Voorhees University, we called the little engine that could. It was so interesting. We paired them with two other institutions. So we were given the opportunity to do a cluster grant. A cluster grant is three institutions working together for a common cause. So Voorhees University, Benedict College, and Claflin University came together to make up what they called the South Carolina cluster. Mm-hmm. This was amazing. What came from that was a high-level career fair, but it was bigger and larger because the community was coming together instead of focusing on just one institution. They developed a relationship with the workforce like no other. The workforce they were looking at resumes. The workforce was the one doing the interviews, the pre-interviews. The workforce was the one coming together to helping support that shift in how to engage with students to ensure that they were ready for internships and ready to move on to the next step after graduation. What excites me even more about those institutions, and specifically Voorhees, is that it wasn't just a project for them. They input the work of the Career Pathways Initiative into their quality enhancement plan, which is tied to their accreditation. Inputting that there made it the focus of the institution and not just something else to get money. So I wanted to make sure to highlight that. I also wanted to share something. We're in the process of site visits right now with all of our institutions. And in the process, when we're talking about what are the institutions doing right now and what are they focusing on, it's all about career pathways initiatives. We have made an impact on the higher education community that they're thinking about integrating their co-curricular engagement into the curriculum. They are talking the same language that we have been talking since 2016. And to me, that is a huge success. It is also a huge opportunity for us to continue the work with our institutions. So I'm excited about that.
Excellent. Just another question, Julian, and Darryl Ann, I hope you jump in on this as well. As a whole, we understanding the HBCU mission. What are some areas, given our current political and economic climate, that our HBCUs should be most focused on when it comes to helping to ensure sustainability? I was wondering if you could reflect on our current time, Julian. What's most important and some of the areas that our HBCUs really need to be focused on to keep them on the path of sustainability? And that's given the reality that some of our institutions have closed in this past year.
In order for an institution to get to a space of long-term sustainability, the first thing it's got to do is stop putting out fires, right? In order to think long-term, you first have to address all of the short-term issues or challenges that you might be facing. And it's been a pretty tumultuous five or 6 years for higher education, right? They had to spend 2 or 3 years figuring out how to help students respond to the pandemic, virtual learning, COVID protocols, the mental health issues that were related to it, and how to make sure that their faculty and staff were responsive to those needs and challenges. Those were all bodies of work that took a lot of time and attention away from what might otherwise have been the type of strategic work that you would hope an institution would be able to embrace. For those institutions that did take on that work, and a lot of them ended up being successful, they still had to contend with pretty intense resource constraints, right? So the tuition dollars aren't coming in a way that satisfy institutional needs in the way that they have in the past. We know that HBCU endowments are much smaller than their PWI counterparts. There was a report from Candid and the Association of Black Foundation Executives, ABFE, which shows that philanthropic dollars aren't going to HBCUs in the way that they have for other PWIs. And so for me, once you get past that point of firefighting, institutions have to really address the resource question head on, which essentially means being strategic about all of the different ways that resources, partnerships, supports can be generated, and then working strategically to engage those resources in a way that the opportunities come to the institution over the long term. So to me, that's the big question or the big challenge. But I know, Darryl Ann, in your work that you're hearing from our institutions directly, how does that resonate?
It absolutely resonates. I was taking notes, so excuse me if I'm looking down and up because I would say there's so much opportunities for growth and support of our institution. So I think first, when it comes to long-term sustainability, moving from surviving to thriving, first, our institutions must get together. We cannot continue working as if we are independent. Like, I'm an independent woman, I don't need anything, but that's not true. There is dependencies that we need to create, healthy dependencies, but dependencies that we need to create, especially when you're looking at political shifts. So I was talking to someone the other day and they were like, well, the current administration will only be in the office 3 more years. That may be true, but impacts from presidencies, no matter who's the president, really extend, and Julian can help me with this, another 4 to 5 years out, right? So, and maybe longer. So we always have to think of not the right now, but what can shift because of decisions that are being made right now. So not focusing on the self, but focusing on the team, the network. The other thing is understanding we have a lot of noise out there, whether it's politically, societally, economically, there is a lot of noise out there. And so we need to come together to determine what is static noise and what's real. In understanding what's real, we can make now informed decisions. data-informed decisions. I didn't even write that down, but I want to say data is another huge area that our institutions need to focus on, because for a long time we've been relying on analytical information. We have this one student and this happened and this happened and we did this, and now the student is the president of the of the United States. I'm exaggerating. It's a good example, but a lot of times those that are interested in supporting our institutions, they need strong data that they can analyze to see what's the starting point and where they want to see the institution end up as a return on investment. A couple of other things I want to throw out. One, multiple streams of income. As you can imagine, there's this enrollment cliff they've been talking about for a while. It was supposed to be 2025. They've shifted it to this 2028. Who knows? But it is happening. It is happening, right? So our institutions, most of our institutions are reliant upon enrollment to pay the bills, right? And we have to shift that mentality to think about different ways the institution can raise funds, one, but then how can we attract students to our institutions when the number of students, the pool is decreasing every year? And then the final thing I wanted to talk about is AI. We are behind the ball when it comes to artificial intelligence. We need to shift our mentality to be inclusive of it. I was talking to an institution earlier. They were talking about developing their own GPT instead of using other external GPTs because of the privacy issues. So there's conversations right now happening, but we need to be further along.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And just one last question for Julian and Darryl Ann. I'll ask you to jump in as well. What word would you say to institutions that haven't engaged, but perhaps could and should engage, for the sake of really putting them on the path to long-term sustainability, which is the goal, of course, of every institution. So what word would you say to institutions who really could stand to gain and benefit from partnering with the Institute? Julian, I'll ask Darryl Ann to close up as well.
Yeah, I would say HBCUs are they are a miracle in a certain way, in terms of the way that they've been able to sustain, the way that HBCUs have been able to take a limited amount of resources and capabilities and really translate that into benefit and value for their communities and for society, that really is transcendent in our country and holds an example to the world of the type of education that people like us ought to receive. Um, in the context of long-term sustainability, oftentimes HBCUs, because of the position that they're in or because of the resources that they have or don't have, find themselves in a defensive posture, right? They don't want to share too much. They don't want to expose any of the issues or dynamics happening on their campuses because they want to protect this really important, valuable, historic institution and make sure that it's available to the next generation. What I would say to HBCUs out there who have that feeling, number one, heard, understood, and appreciated. That's a position that oftentimes feels natural given the state of play, and given the desire to be protective of your institutions. I would want those leaders to also know that in the Institute for Capacity Building, you've got a group of leaders who are waking up every day 10 toes down for what it means for HBCUs to thrive. That we build our spirit, our culture, our systems, our ways of being, who we invite into our community, who we keep out of our community, based on the needs of institutional transformation for the most innovative product in the history of higher education in the United States, which is the HBCU. So I'm hopeful that the HBCUs listening to this podcast can hear and appreciate that, and know that you have a community within the Institute for Capacity Building that at the end of the day, resources or no, challenges or no, is always going to position itself to make sure that HBCUs are in a position to thrive.
I love that. Okay, so did y'all see me laughing earlier? It's because I'm silly, but I'm going to still give you my silly word because I think we're great. So my word is supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, which means come and let us do some extraordinary work together.
Fantastic. Julian, Darryl Ann, thank you so very much for taking time out of, I know, your busy schedules to share with our audience on these important topics. Thank you so very much for joining us on In the Margins. We appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, David.
All right. Bye-bye.